we've been experiencing trauma over and over and over and over again. And people wonder why there are these outlashes. But let's also put this out there: mental health and taking care of your mental health has also been
It seems random, but I got purpose. Things coming together so beautifully. One day, it all makes sense. Just you wait and see. Take this journey with me. Purposely random, purposely random, purposely random, purposely random.
Hey, what's up, you guys? It's your girl Angelise, and this is the podcast Purposely Random, a podcast by Angelise. Let's get into the theme song. Got to take care of, got to take care of, got to take care of your mind. Oh, free your emotions, explore your thoughts, bring the subconscious into the forefront of who you're being. Find peace, be okay with not being okay every day. Yeah, got to take care of, got to take care of, got to take care of your mind. Oh, got to take care of, got to take care of, got to take care of your mind. So, as you guys know, mental health is something that I'm really a big advocate for. A lot of the things that I talk about are interpersonal skills and self awareness, and also just like understanding what's on my mind and what's going on with me, so that way I can be a better output. Worrying about my input so I can give a better output into the world and to myself, feeding into myself. So mental health and emotional health are not the same. They get tied together a lot because they are heavily related, but they're not the same thing. So I wanted to talk today a little bit about some of those differences. So mental health and emotional health are different, and here is the first way: processing information versus expressing emotion. Part of mental health is how well your mind processes and understands information and experiences. In contrast, emotional health involves your ability to manage and express the emotions that arise from what you have learned and experienced. So one, you are processing what you're experiencing; the other one, you are managing your emotions as you process and live your life as you experience things. I really want to help everyone here become more emotionally intelligent, so that way we know how we feel, what we feel, why we feel, so that way we can express it to other people and really understand ourselves. So once you understand yourself, you can then explain to other people. It's all about finding your voice and managing these emotions. I'm a very passionate person. I be having a lot of emotions, and we all do. That's a true tea. True tea is that we are complex beings with complex emotions, and it's time that we understand why we feel what we feel. Another difference is one can thrive while the other struggles. So, an important distinction between mental health and emotional health is that you can experience mental health issues while maintaining good emotional health, and vice versa. For example, while struggling with a mental health problem like having little energy for daily tasks, you can still exhibit health by finding effective ways to manage that lack of energy. So, instead of you being out of your window of tolerance, which we'll talk about in another episode, which is, right in that money spot where like you can really like be like, I'm not going to be reactive. I'm going to just let things flow and I'm going to go with things. So when you're tired, you're really more liable to be outside of that window of tolerance. So you can have that lack of energy, but still express, hey, emotionally, I feel like I'm going to be more reactive. So because I'm out of this window of tolerance, let me go ahead and sit this one out. Let me go ahead and not kind of be around because I can feel that this is going to be more explosive than if I was in my window of tolerance. The window of tolerance is that perfect space where you can handle anything. It's when you are good, when you are Gucci, when you're like, oh, I'm good. That ain't really annoying. That's a little annoying, but I'm not gonna let it ruin my day. I'm not gonna be depressed about it, which is the lower out of it's the lower end of the window. And then I'm not having anxiety, which is the higher end of the window. Which here's the window, here's anxiety, here's depression. Not here, but here is depression. And a good way to express good emotional health is just to say, right now I do have a lack of energy, which would normally get you outside of that window of tolerance. You're more susceptible when you don't get enough sleep, if you don't get enough food, if you don't get enough water, and things like that, to be outside of that window of tolerance. So you can express, hey, right now I'm out of my window of tolerance. So I'm not going to be able to handle the feedback that you have for me today. Um, and I don't want to be reactive at all. I definitely want to be in the right state of mind, that window of tolerance, so that way I can really truly process what you're trying to say to me. Um, I've said that a lot at work because I'd be tired. And sometimes I'd be frustrated and they be trying to come in with their little feedback. And I'd be like, you know, I just can't. I just, on today, I'm just not gonna be able to be receptive of the feedback that you have to give. And I don't want it to be misunderstood because I definitely want to hear what you have to say. Can I come to you at another time? And some people may think that that's unapproachable. Some people may think that that's unapproachable, but for me, it's just like I'm just trying to be honest. I don't want to have a misunderstanding because I just not prepared to hear what you have to say. Nothing personal, except for me. It ain't you, boo. It's me. It's definitely it's not just a breakup. It's definitely me. Okay, the third difference is mental health is not only about how well you understand and process what you experience, it also includes your ability to carefully reason through decisions and maintain a steady, focused attention span. The wide scope of mental health puts it in sharp contrast to emotional health, which has more focused definitions on actively understanding and maintaining your emotions. Let's talk about some mental health problems. So, over the course of your life, if you experience mental health problems, your thinking, mood, and behavior could be affected. Many factors contribute to mental health problems, including biological factors such as genes or brain chemistry. That's why a lot of people they try to alter their brain chemistry by doing drugs and by like getting high or um, just chasing something to change their chemicals in their brain. Um, there's also the life experiences that you have, such as trauma or abuse, which abuse can cause trauma. So those are kind of a lot of times they go hand in hand. And then family history of mental health problems. Today, we are going to focus on trauma. So, we're going to get into that. Okay. All right. What is trauma? It is a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. Psychological trauma is damage to the mind that occurs as a result of distressing events. Trauma is often the result of an overwhelming amount of emotions involved with the experience. What are some symptoms, you might be asking? So, this is shock, denial, disbelief, confusion, difficulty concentrating, anger, irritability, mood swings, anxiety, and fear, guilt, shame, self blame, withdrawing from others, feeling sad or hopeless, feeling disconnected or numb. What can cause this? I think a lot of us throw the word trauma around and we're not really understanding the depths of what might have caused this in other people's lives. So let's get into that. So things like rape or domestic violence, natural disasters, severe illnesses or injury, death of a loved one, witnessing an act of violence, betrayal, um, taking someone's innocence, if someone takes your innocence, things like that can all cause that. So there's three types of trauma. There's acute trauma, which is like a single incident. Could be like a car accident, theft, witnessing a violent event. Chronic trauma, which is repeated and prolonged, such as domestic violence or abuse. Complex trauma, which is like when you're exposed to varied and multiple traumatic events, often of an invasive interpersonal nature, and the wide ranging long term effects of the exposure. These events are severe and perverse, such as abuse or prolonged neglect. They usually occur early in life and can disrupt many aspects of the child's development and the formation of the sense of self. So that says it talks a lot about childhood, and I know people are like, well, they always want you to talk about what your mom and dad did to you, and why, how did you feel as a child? Well, that's because that's who you're being formed as a child. You are being formed, and so your sense of self is tied into how your parents treated you, how what you've experienced in school when you are learning how to become a person. And now you're expected to just be well and whole and got it going on. But no, 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 honey. I told my parents, I said, you could be the perfect parent, your child's still gonna be messed up. And I realized that by going to therapy, that everybody gets messed up because people are trying to protect you because of their world experience. You also experience these things we talked about before when it comes to betrayal and maybe abuse and things like that. So we're all jacked up from childhood, and it's not because of necessarily a bad thing. It's just your sense of self gets tied up. You're becoming, and so with you becoming, you get kind of wonked up. You bang your head, you bang your heart, you bang your emotions. So some things that might have occurred that can lead to this complex trauma are child abuse, neglect, adverse childhood experiences, community violence, domestic and family violence, civil unrest, war, trauma, genocide, cultural dislocation, sexual exploitation, and trafficking. So those are some things that people as a child may have experienced. Let's talk about PTSD. So we talked about trauma. So let's talk about traumatic distress. Post traumatic stress disorder. Um, PTSD. I know that we hear a lot about it when it comes to like war veterans or, um, maybe someone that has dealt in your life. You might know of someone that has PTSD. There's different kinds. So we're going to talk about PTSD and complex PTSD. So, PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder, is a mental health condition that's triggered by a terrifying event, either experiencing it or witnessing it. Symptoms may include flashbacks, nightmares, and severe anxiety, as well as uncontrollable thoughts about the event. Most people who go through traumatic events may have temporary difficulties adjusting and coping, but with time and good self care, they usually get better. If the symptoms get worse, last for months or even years, and interfere with your day to day functioning, you may have PTSD. Getting effective treatment after PTSD symptoms develop can be critical to reduce your symptoms and improve your functioning. It's characterized by intense fear, helplessness, and stress. PTSD affects the normal life and functioning of the patient. So, again, I'm just kind of reiterating that PTSD, we all normally we have things that we can get over just real quick, and it's not a big deal. We think a lot of times our brain is, we talked about this last time, our brain is protecting us, so it's suppressing a lot of these things, and that's why it's important to bring the subconscious into the conscious so you can really heal. Let's get into some complex PTSD. This refers to the set of symptoms that commonly follow exposure to traumatic events that are long lasting and generally involve some form of physical or emotional capacity, such as childhood sexual and or physical abuse or domestic violence. Okay, so let's talk about some differences between PTSD and complex PTSD. So, one or few traumas is what will happen when you have PTSD. Complex PTSD, there will be chronic, inescapable traumas. Both of them, you'll have flashbacks. And PTSD, you'll have avoidance of things that trigger or invoke or suggest trauma memory. With complex PTSD, there'll be social isolation, avoidance of relationships. Um, Nightmares will happen about the trauma will happen when you have PTSD. And then with complex PTSD, you'll have night terrors and chronic insomnia. With PTSD, some dissociation may include the dissociative identity disorder. And with complex PTSD, it includes fragmented sense of self and dissociative identity disorder. With PTSD, you'll have a hypervigilance, and with complex PTSD, you'll have hypervigilance, some ideas of reference, preoccupation with the abuser. Now that we talked a little bit about PTSD, I have been diagnosed with PTSD. And I believe that I do have some complex PTSD about some different scenarios in my life. But I did want to talk about the brain. I don't know if a lot of you know about this, but back in 2016, I was on a train headed to work and it was um, semi derailed by a car. And during that accident, I did suffer from a concussion. And that's when I learned a lot about the amygdala. Um, and it's a part of your brain. I witnessed something very traumatic. The man that hit the train with his car ended up passing away. Um, and I learned what was happening with me having like weird flashbacks or me having insomnia and me just not having any real control of my mind. So let's talk about how trauma affects the brain. So trauma affects the way your neural pathways form or not form. Trauma can thus cause lasting changes in the areas of the brain that deal with stress, namely the amygdala, otherwise known as the fear center. The amygdala, which is responsible for the perception of the emotions such as anger, fear, and sadness, as well as the controlling of aggression. The amygdala helps to store memories in events and emotions so that the individual may be able to recognize similar events in the future. So when you're in a situation that seems familiar to you, you're gonna freak out, and it's been known the amygdala to get bigger when after you experience trauma. There's been different brain studies that show this happening. Um, Another thing that can be affected by trauma is the hippocampus is thought to be principally involved in storing long-term memories and in making those memories resistant to being forgotten. Though this is a matter of debate, it is also thought to play an important role in the sympatical processing and navigation. It plays a critical role in the formation, organization, and storage of new memories, as well as connecting certain sensations and emotions to those memories. Another thing that can be affected by trauma is the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is an important site for working memory function. According to one interpretation, this brain region participates directly in the storage of information. However, the prefrontal cortex is also associated with control of working memory. So just a couple of different places where you can experience trauma and it affects your memory, the way that you engage with others, just different things that have to do with how you experience other people and your memories and just your day to day life. of storing those memories. So now that we know a little bit of how trauma affects the brain, I wanted to kind of bring up the amygdala. The amygdala has really stood out to me because that is your like fear sensor, like we talked about before. It's like, hey, get out of here, get out of here, get out of here. And then you just freak out and your anxiety is exposed to that and you become more anxious over time. So that is something that I'm all too familiar with. Now I'm thinking about looking at the world and how all this trauma that we've experienced in the Black and Brown community has affected us. We've been experiencing trauma over and over and over and over again. And people wonder why there are these outlashes. But let's also put this out there: mental health and taking care of your mental health has also been super stigmatized. There's so many people that tell you, oh, you don't need to go to no crazy house. We need to talk about that in our own stuff. You need to pray about it. Don't be going to talk to nobody. That is weird. You can handle it yourself. No, no. We need to talk about what's going on with us. We need to make it known. We need to have these conversations and not only have conversations, but we need to make changes. So, with everything that's going on right now with the world, with COVID-19, with the since day one systematic racism, let's think about our thoughts. Let's be real that we have been experiencing trauma this whole time and it's been chronological, it's been documented. There's a whole system that is working to keep us in this traumatic experience. And so now is the time to stand up. Now is the time to take care of your mind and ask for what you want and find your voice. People might not always agree with what your voice is saying, but you're still saying it. This country was founded on life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We deserve to be happy. We deserve life. We deserve liberty. We've been oppressed for far too long. So now it's time to wake up, to stand up, to change as a country. All right. On the next episode, we're going to talk about mental health problem signs. We're going to talk about anxiety, depression, and panic attacks. Coping with those things, coping skills. I know we talked about negative and positive coping skills, and we're just going to learn more. This was a little bit of a heavier episode, I do declare. It was a lot of information. I'm still trying to figure out the formatting, so we'll get into the zhuzh. And we're going to expand on a lot of these topics as we're going through this series. So I do hope that you guys kind of stick with me as we're going through this journey. And as always, be real, be you, do what you came here to do, and be the light that you want to see. Peace.